Game devs of Reddit, what is a frequent criticism of games that isn't as easy to fix it as sounds? Networked multiplayer is way harder than most players understand. It's not a feature that you can just drop into an existing game. Every single element that's visible to multiple players needs to be at least partially rebuilt to ensure that the state exists in a concise form that the networking system can deal with. And the state space of possible interactions that can lead to desyncs is huge. Think about culling systems used for performance, for example, and how they interact with objects that are supposed to be kept synced across clients. This is exacerbated because most games with a reasonable number of players don't actually have the spare network capacity to sync every effect all the time, so you wind up cheating a huge amount and trying to triage what the players will notice. There's also a ton of weird corner cases that happen when you have different entities interacting with each other when they are being controlled simulated on different computers separated by a sizable chunk of a second worth of latency. This leads to frustration as players are killed by shots that are impossible on their client, or miss shots that felt perfectly lined up to them. It also makes networked physics a colossal nightmare that never 100% works right. That's before we even get started talking about cheat detection. Networking bugs are very frustrating, but do please understand that networking is very likely the most technically challenging and fragile element of any game that includes it, especially these days. Whenever I hear "oh god, this bug is so obvious, why didn't QA find this?" Spoiler alert, QA likely did, months ago. That bug has been sitting in someone's queue to fix, and because a lot of large companies prioritize development of new over fixing, particularly because production doesn't always realize that this crap takes time, that bug was missed. Months of crunch time, rarely seeing daylight, and constantly shifting goalposts will drain you fast. I think it has to be the game balance. Just because what some people think is balanced, other people think is OP as heck. I feel like developers do their best to make the game balanced upon release, but then when gamers get their hands on the game they discover combos and loadouts that the devs never really thought of, and that breaks the game until a balance patch is rolled out, only for the process to be repeated all over again. Tutorialization. Players have a huge discrepancy in affordances, things they already know expect from your game. Making your game so it properly teaches new players how to play without annoying players who are more familiar with the mechanics is rough. Teaching is difficult in general. The problems are exacerbated when you don't have a professional there to gauge the student's understanding and adjust. If the game doesn't let you skip the tutorial, it's the game's fault for being boring and blocking you from the main part of the game. If the game does let you skip the tutorial and you do despite not understanding how to play and you get frustrated, it's the game's fault for not properly teaching you how to play. Every stupidly obvious thing that the game tries to explain to you is only there because a not insignificant number of players got confused by it. Then this whole problem is exacerbated by making games that do ongoing updates. Now you have to constantly update your tutorial to make sure accurate to changes in mechanics. You have to teach new mechanics to veteran players of your game, but also to the brand new player who just picked up your game because the newest stuff caught their eye and they want to rush to playing with that. On one hand, I do appreciate that most games these days go for a seamless immersive tutorial that teaches you the mechanics as you start the game. On the other hand, when you come back to a game after weeks, months, and there's no way to re-familiarize yourself with the mechanics, I usually end up just walking away. A former driver developer at ATI explained to me that 70% of his optimization time was in fixing the stupid things third-party engines did. This was before AMD and Nvidia optimized for particular games as openly as they do today. He couldn't even talk to the developers, because the game was made by teams who didn't have a clue about the inner workings of the engine, and changing engine version would cause the mother of all regression tests. What did go back to the engine developers might be fixed in future versions of the engine, but that doesn't help the here and now, and won't help the game which exposes it. As the game developer, is the engine developer really going to fix an edge case you only see in this one game and on a poorly defined selection of hardware? At best you'll get a hacked up workaround which causes more problems than it solves. At worst you fix it yourself and have to spend sprint time which isn't ticking off your own backlog. Your Scrum Master will kick your ass for that. If Nvidia fixed the engine stupidity first, Nvidia sells more GeForces. If ATI had fixed it first, more Radeons, So there's the incentive for the hardware manufacturers to do the engine developers' jobs for them. Then people wonder why video drivers are so big. Localization. Holy frick, localization. The thing people don't understand is not everything translates perfectly. Sometimes you need to rephrase things. You also need to hire someone you can trust to do the translation. And it's not just for characters. It's for buttons, menus, voices, text, etc. And then you need to include special characters if you're using a special font. And then because the characters are different, you need to adjust your UI accordingly so that everything lines up okay. Unfortunately, people just think you translate the text and punch it into the computer, but localization can take weeks. I enjoyed fan translations back when they'd not translate some words and try to explain the cultural significance or their difficulties with the word. It broke immersion like nothing else, but it was usually quite interesting. Lazy hitboxes. 1. Perfect hitboxes are glitchier. 2. Perfect hitboxes require more polygons and are invisible, making the game slower. 3. Perfect hitboxes are 500x more likely to pass through another object without giving a frick. 4. I can literally use the model of whatever I wanted to give a hitbox to give it a perfect hitbox. It's more work to give it an imperfect hitbox. Except 1, 2 and 3. What the heck are the developers doing? How can they be so lazy to not fix this bug that appears 1/100 times I do this action? It doesn't break the game or affect the visual much in any way, but it's still lazy of them. Blah blah blah. Sometimes it's hard to find the reason causing the bugs. Debugging isn't just pressing some random keys or reading through a few lines of codes. Hard to replicate bugs are even worse to find the source of the problem. A lot of times there are a lot of files, and the dependencies between them causes the bug. Each file can have over 100 lines of codes. It can take from a few days to weeks to read through everything and test to find the problem. Sure, we can waste days or weeks to find them, but we are better off using that time to fix other more game-breaking bugs or adding new content. Sometimes it's just not worth fixing a bug that doesn't break the game, hardly appears and barely affects the player's experience. I picked up 3D modeling, animation, and Unity programming as a hobby this year. I no longer complain about anything in games, ever. The sheer amount of work that goes into these games is astounding. The number of people that have to coordinate together is frankly amazing. Bugs, graphical glitches, minor balancing. Real talk, a game is never truly finished or perfect. There just hits a point where you either run out of money to produce, run out of time, or just need it out the fricking door for whatever reason. Priorities are getting the game playable start to finish, all important art and functionality in, getting rid of game breaking and critical bugs, general smoothing over of controls, touching up whatever we can as we have time to. Even the most polished looking and feeling games have a massive ton of crap swept under the carpet and bits and pieces bolted on with tape and broken dreams. When people are like a floating rock. Haha, so lazy it's just like, frick you, Kevin. How about you build all these worlds piece by piece in the time given and come back and tell me if you got it all done perfectly or if you got fired for being overly meticulous and taking ages on something that could be requested to be changed at the wave of a director or designer's hand. From my experience, it's not that we don't notice stuff. We just have so much crap that's higher priority. It's like judging a parent as bad because their shirt's on backwards, when really they have it on backwards because they were too busy spending all night being awake and looking after their sick kid to worry about something as cosmetic as a shirt. Source: I'm dev, mostly in creative direction, production and marketing. Fallout 3's other than crashing bugs were part of the game experience. Everyone sees the sky spider at some point only once, no one knows WTF it is. It's a religious experience. I suffer from something that people would say is the easiest, assets game style. I am a programmer, not an artist, so a lot of my things you have to appreciate the mechanics first, then the assets come last. Sometimes I drop in a free asset pack after months of coding work just to get someone to make the comment, holy crap that looks amazing man, just to get those feels. Then I will remove the assets and get back to work and not hear a peep out of anyone about how it plays looks based on the mechanics. No glory for the code monkeys. Everyone loves the art, but the code only gets noticed when it fails. The AI in this game are idiotic. The AI in this game is cheating. The AI in this game is too hard. Or, this game has too many things to do. There isn't enough to do in this game. I've seen complaints from the same people about the same game. One day making one argument, then making the opposite argument the next. That's without any patching or updates. Server issues. But at the same time, devs never seem understand just how many servers they are going to need to keep their game rocking and rolling well at launch. Especially AAA games that have all the publicity. Just because 200k people played your closed beta doesn't mean that enough for 1 million is enough. Crank it up to 25 meters slots for people, and if that's too many then repurpose them for the next launch. I find it crazy that this still happens despite the majority of players playing on platforms where they're required to buy a subscription that costs like $60 per year under the guise of supporting online infrastructure. Even more ridiculous is still being required to pay that fee to access the large number of peer-hosted multiplayer games. Why can't I go through this busted door knee-high hedge hole in the wall? I should realistically fit through it, so let me through. Well, that would require either A. restructuring the environment entirely to make a ruined building have untouched solid walls, potentially preventing you from knowing there's even something beyond for you to try to get. The level was already designed before the environment artists had it. To change something like that may mean going back to the level design phase. B. coding complex hitbox mechanics to allow the player to traverse things that they realistically could, likely also requiring additional animations. At the least, it's nearly impossible to predict every well the player should fit through there, so you can't go through and code animate each occurrence. My favorite part about playing Fallout 4 in VR was that glitching through walls was so easy. If it looks like I could go through a hole in the wall, or climb a fence, I just glitched through. Fun times. It doesn't work, or this is boring, or something to that extent. Zero details, nothing explained. I want you to fix it anyway. Complaints about day 1 patches. It should seem dumb that there needs to be an update day 1. Why couldn't they have updated it before shipping it? The issue is, the game was shipped like a month before release date, so stores could carry physical copies. In between that time, bugs are detected and development has continued. I haven't seen this on the thread yet, but ever since Fortnite came out with cross-compatibility, I constantly have my friends complaining it hasn't rolled out to other games yet. This not only sounds like a huge business maze to traverse, but a heck of a technical featuring to carry out and keep running effectively. In general, cross-platform games should share the same source code with a layer of system-specific code, for example, file system and networking code, that varies between platforms out of necessity. It'd be a waste to develop an entirely new networking protocol for each platform, so in most cases they're probably compatible anyways. That multithreading just needs to be slapped on to improve performance. Multithreading, when implemented poorly and hastily, actually makes games slower because I offloaded calculations to a thread when I didn't have to, and now I don't know when I can expect the calculations to return a value when making it single threaded would have resulted in faster processing time. You have a problem, and you decide to fix it using multithreading. To now have problems. This post gave me a whole new respect for small devs and even the regular desk jockey of larger companies. Keep on keeping on, you glorious bastards. Players always complain about matchmaking. Matchmaking is a combination of finding games in a timely manner and making those games fun by matching players of similar skill levels. When you are talking about team games, it means finding 6 to 12 players of near the same skill level, because players don't want to play against players better than them, or with players worse than them. If your game has roles that players can queue as, that's an additional restriction. But that's not even the entire problem. The game doesn't just have to be fair, it has to look fair. So if you match a diamond player against a gold player, the players won't like it, even if by your estimate those players are similarly skilled. Some games have rankings completely determined by estimated skill, so this isn't a problem, but many don't. Many reward players who play more, so two players who are different skill levels, but the worse one plays more, could be the same rank. And this is before we talk about how accurate your skill estimates actually are. It's not that complicated to get reasonable estimates in 1v1 games, but in team games it is a nightmare, almost impossible to do better than just counting wins and losses. But the effects of a win or loss need to vary by how good or bad a match the game actually was, and in what way. Basically, finding players a good online game quickly is almost impossible unless you have an astronomical number of players online at any given time. The rules also change drastically based on expectation of player count because nothing is worse than waiting long times for a match. Complaints about the tone and story. I used to bag on game writers for making a confusing story that fell flat. And sure, sometimes the writer just isn't very good, but after being in the industry for 14 years I'm convinced they've got the toughest, most high pressure jobs, especially in big AAA games. It's an art form with a low barrier of entry, since every idiot with a laptop can start writing whatever they want and call themselves a writer these days. But true mastery of it, especially in games, is extremely rare. Those games you've played that changed your life had stories built by these people under years of intense pressure. That's an absurd amount of content if the game is open world. Imagine writing scenes and an overarching plot for a game with 1,000 moving parts. Levels are prototyped, things get moved around constantly, or cut altogether because of scope. Characters have to be brought to life and be fascinating, complex, and have engaging personalities. This is incredibly tough if you're making a new IP. Even harder is making a new IP of an already existing property, like Spider-Man or God of War, because there's already an expectation from the legions of fans, many of whom may work in your studio. Throughout this entire process everybody is crapping on your work, from the directors who hate it, to the interns who hear a joke they think is corny. Everything you write goes into this ever-changing script. Temp actors record the lines, usually other devs, and then your work gets evaluated. God help you if the game directors don't know how to squint. Temp actors can ruin a scene just as easily as a bad script. It isn't uncommon for games to go through multiple rewrites during a production cycle. Massive overhauls as the team discovers they need to make huge cuts to make the deadline. Then there are the incidentals you have to write, like collectibles, thousands of lines of character and NPC banter. Then you're also involved in casting and the professional voice recording. Actors can change multiple times as well, and throughout this time people are still criticizing your work. Now there's a lot more pressure because rewrites now cost a lot of money because of the professional actors. Oh crap. Don't forget about localization. Now that emotional moment you were building up to for the last 20 hours and cap off with a joke doesn't work in Czech. What do you do now? Then the game releases and it's the thing that makes or breaks a story-driven game. Everything is so subjective and you never know how players will vibe with what you've done. Oftentimes you've been working on it until the very end and ran out of time. It's a wild job. DLC. I've never worked anywhere where it was content cut from the base game. Artists, designers, and programmers all finish their part of a project at different times and can move on to DLC when the base is done. So something is planned for them to do. Before DLC I worked at places where teams were let go between projects. The concept of models, rigs, skeletons, and animations seem to be blurred into one single thing for a lot of players. Like the vast majority of Drake mounts in WoW, they have completely different models, but all move the same way because they share a rig that uses certain animations. Development-wise, for players to expect devs to make completely unique animations for 40 different dragons that all have the same anatomy is absurd, and then they complain on Reddit forums that too many dragons have the same model. What? Whenever someone says the graphics aren't good enough, like okay I can understand if you want better graphics, but improving graphics is really hard, and for artists making simple 3D models already takes a long time, plus texturing and then animating. Even worse is making an engine that supports 3D models and animations. So making graphics is hard enough, now you want photorealistic ones? I know it is possible, but then you complain when a game is delayed a month. We are talking a very long time to make graphics better. Then the system requirements would be crazy high and everyone would complain about that. Thus has no mention of the cost of doing all that. Sorry this got so long and became such a rant, but I just had to say that. Oh, also that bug you want fixed is an engine issue. Let's upgrade the engine. Guess what, that upgrade broke everything. I'm not sure I have an example, but it's impossible because of so and so things I see could be done easily, and that should take 5 minutes ones usually would take months. Pretty much like other software development. My most favorite thing is when people call WoW code garbage. I don't work on WoW, but it's a gigantic feature-rich world with millions of players. You almost never load. Now they do all this seamless server switching behind the scenes. I played for 10 years and I don't think I had one crash, and could count the bugs I saw on one hand. If WoW code is garbage, every other piece of software you use is literally Hitler. Whenever I hear YouTubers try and say anything about making a game being easy, I both cringe and chuckle at their ignorance. Making a game is easy, now making a good one on the other hand. Graphics are more freaking graphics. I'm just getting into game design and when my kids play my games, it's just, "Dad, why does it look so bad?" It's not that fucking easy. Why didn't they just add multiplayer co-op? It takes a completely different structure and strategy for most game objects, putting this request vastly out of scope for most projects that don't start with it in mind. Cheaters. Seriously, I promise you that if you come up with an anti-cheat that makes it impossible for people to cheat, you will be rich in no time. How rich? Because it's literally impossible. The thing is, the coders for and against cheaters are equally skilled. For every intelligent person that comes up with an anti-cheat, there's one intelligent person that comes up with a roundabout. It's never easy with criticism. Don't add every requested thing. The hardest is probably when Q2D game is really good and everybody wants a 3D port XD. Risk of Rain 2 did an amazing job. It feels like the first game, but also completely new. I think the devs have really outdone themselves. It would be so easy for them to implement A. Probably not. No, implementing A would probably cause X, Y and Z to break, and fixing those would probably break 5 other things, so on and so forth. Okay, so when a grenade or other explosive hits one side of an object, for example a couch, and you ask why did I not die when you're on the other side of the couch, it sounds simple to fix. In fact, it's a complex issue as you have to go through so many hoops to fix this problem. Objects can be as small as think poles or tinny boxes. Currently studying games programming, but one thing that hugely sticks out to me in the AAA industry is how almost all bad games design decisions are pushed to be the devs' fault. Crappy monetization? Why the frick are the devs screwing us? Gameplay balance that pushes loot boxes? Why did the devs balance it that way? Game release isn't finished? Why didn't they just hold it back and finish it? Almost all monetization is pushed on the devs by publishers, and they don't care how it impacts the game, as long as it rakes in the cash. The devs simply have to do as they're told. Sure, they get creative decisions on the game itself, but the time frame, motorization, and nowadays even the idea of a single player campaign is decided by the publisher. The devs are often doomed to redeem an already bad idea the publisher wants them to make. I know for a fact that most devs probably hate making these games filled with complete bulls since they're passionate about games like the rest of us. But at the end of the day, they need get paid. On the other end of the spectrum with indie titles, I am tired of seeing people complain that a game is bad just because the devs don't change it to fit their ideas for the game, despite the game usually being rather good in my experience. The number of times that I see people who don't know anything about programming and claim spaghetti code LOL when they run into problems, all because they heard that comment once and now believe they've got a criticism that makes them sound in the know about the background of a something's development. There are legitimate cases where, yes, the code is spaghetti. There's no reason why every single problem should be met with that criticism though. Everything about game development takes ridiculous amounts of time. I don't think people really realize what all goes into it. There are a lot of moving parts. One particular issue I've seen complained about is movement. To me, it's incredibly important to have the movement in any sort of physics-based game be fun. Think Super Mario Odyssey. But getting to that level of polish and fine-tuning takes a very long time, a lot of experience, and is rather difficult even then. Netcode is freaking black magic. The fact that we have multiplayer games that communicate across the country and feel like you're playing with someone in the same room is amazing. There's no button that just fixes the netcode. Everything is a trade-off. Everything has a downside. Developers have tried a lot of things and determined from data usually that it doesn't work well for the game they are trying to make. You know what? The majority of frequent criticisms are way harder to fix than people think. Except microtransactions, those they're awful, but it's all the business majors' fault, not the devs. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.